Hello, students. We're going to go ahead and start Unit 3 with this video. It's the first video of Unit 3. In Unit 3, we're going to be looking at energy, a lot of things about energy and how energy is used and transformed in living things. That's the overall gist. There's 3 sets of notes that go with this unit, the 3.1 notes, the 3.2 notes, and the 3.3 notes. Obviously, in this video, we're going to start with the 3.1 notes and look at the very first topic, topic 1, which is an intro to this idea of metabolism and some basic principles of thermodynamics. So lots of sciencey things. Let's start with metabolism. So metabolism refers to all of the chemical reactions taking place inside of a living organism. So every living thing has a metabolism. And it's the cumulative number of all the different chemical reactions taking place inside that living organism and inside of all the cells of that organism at every moment of every day. That's your metabolism. And so there's thousands and thousands of different reactions that make up an organism's metabolism. And again, this is in every living thing, including us, obviously, but other forms of life, other animals, plants, single-celled organisms, bacteria. Everything has a metabolism. And so in a metabolism, you're going to have all these different chemical reactions happening, and they form these things called metabolic pathways. And these different pathways, which are a series of chemical reactions taking place, are all very interconnected, kind of like this picture is illustrating here. This is just to give you guys a bigger understanding of how complicated metabolism is. This is a schematic of lots of different chemical reactions taking place inside of an organism and inside of cells. And so there's a lot going on. But like I said, an organism's metabolism is made up of a bunch of different interconnected metabolic pathways. We've kind of talked about metabolic pathways a little bit, but that refers to when you have a series of chemical reactions taking place. They're taking some sort of substance and ultimately turning it into something else in a series of steps. And each of those steps, or each of those smaller reactions involved in this pathway, are controlled by different enzymes. And so here's just a very simple depiction of a metabolic pathway. You have some kind of starting molecule A, and we're trying to turn it into molecule D. But oftentimes there's not just a simple one and done reaction that can do that. And there's a pathway of reactions that have to take place. So you have to first turn A into B, and then B into C, and then finally you can turn C into D. And so that's just a small metabolic pathway, a small illustration of one. But each of those reactions is controlled by different enzymes that are involved that make up that metabolic pathway. There's 2 different types of metabolic pathways. There's catabolic pathways and anabolic pathways, which are going to make up an organism's metabolism. We'll start with a catabolic pathway. So a catabolic pathway, also called catabolism, is whenever you're taking larger, more complex molecules, and in a series of chemical reactions, they're ultimately being broken down into smaller pieces, smaller molecules. So that would be considered catabolism, or a catabolic pathway, which, if you recall from Unit 1, that would involve a lot of hydrolysis reactions. Hydrolysis reactions are the type of reactions that break bonds between monomers, for example, breaking things down, big molecules into small molecules. And so that's exactly what's going on in a catabolic pathway. Now, these pathways that are taking large, complex molecules and breaking them down into simpler, smaller molecules, they're going to result in a net release of energy. And so that's a key feature of a catabolic pathway. For example, cell respiration, which we're going to talk about a lot this unit, that's a process where in cells they can take glucose and other organic molecules, and these molecules are going to be broken down into smaller, simpler molecules like CO2 and H2O. And so we're taking C6H12O6 and ultimately breaking it down into H2O, into CO2 molecules. So that would be an example of a catabolic pathway. And that pathway does release energy, and that's what our cells are going to try to harness that energy to make ATP to power our cells in our bodies. The opposite of that is what's called an anabolic pathway, or anabolism. An anabolic pathway is one that's taking small molecules and putting them together to build larger, more complex molecules. And these type of pathways will always require energy and input of energy to do this. This is not something that just happens on its own. There's got to be an input of energy to make these types of reactions happen, these anabolic pathways. And there's lots of examples of this. One example, just to give you one, is protein synthesis. And so that's when proteins are being made, the synthesis of proteins. And to build a protein, as we learned, you got to take amino acids, which are these small monomers, and link amino acids together to build a large polypeptide that folds up into a protein. And so taking those smaller amino acids and putting them together into a large protein, that would be an anabolic process or a part of an anabolic pathway. Photosynthesis is another example that we'll talk about a lot this unit. It's basically the opposite of cell respiration. In photosynthesis, plants are taking CO2 and H2O, small, simple molecules, and putting them together to build glucose and other larger, more complex organic molecules, which does require an input of energy, which is why they need the energy from the sun to do that. So that's the difference. And so lots of reactions inside of you are anabolic, lots of reactions inside of you are catabolic, and those millions of different examples of reactions inside of you make up your metabolism. And then in topic 1, it continues on to talk about energy, a lot of just basic stuff about energy that we need to make sure we're all on the same page about. And so just a lot of this should hopefully sound a little familiar, but we'll go through it real quick. There's 2 types of energy. Well, energy can be classified into one of 2 categories. There's kinetic energy and there's potential energy. Kinetic energy has to do with motion or movement. And so anything that has to do with movement is going to be kinetic energy. And so some obvious examples of that would be like just literally like an object moving, or like this ball falling down. Or someone riding their bike, or a car driving on the road, or a roller coaster going on the tracks. Those are all forms of kinetic energy. But then there's more abstract examples of kinetic energy that you guys don't really usually think about. Some that are important for this unit are thermal energy. So thermal energy, or heat, that is an example of kinetic energy. So heat is, or thermal energy has to do with the how fast molecules are moving. So when we're looking at how much heat an object has, or how much thermal energy an object has, it has to do with how fast all the particles are moving that make up that object. And so when we say an object is hot, it's hot because it has particles that are moving really, really fast. Or if it's cold, it's because it has particles moving really, really slow. So thermal energy is kinetic energy. It has to do with particles moving and how fast they're moving. Same thing with the molecules in this air. If I was in a very cold room, it's because the molecules in this air are moving slowly. Whereas if I was in a room where the air is really hot, that's because the molecules are moving a lot faster. Like that's what heat or thermal energy is. It's how fast those particles are moving. And so that's an example of kinetic energy that we often don't think about. And then another one is light. Light is also a form of kinetic energy. Light has to do with these packets of energy called photons that are traveling in waves at the speed of light through space. And so light and those photons zipping through, traveling in these waves at the speed of light, that is kinetic energy as well. So that's all examples of kinetic energy. And then there's potential energy, which is even more abstract a little bit. This is energy that an object has because of, or something has because of its position or location or structure. And so this is kind of, a lot of times students think of it as stored energy. This is energy that's there but is not currently being used, but could eventually lead to some kind of movement or kinetic energy because of the arrangement or structure of that object or substance. And so in middle school, oftentimes you guys learn examples of potential energy in terms of gravity. So because of an object's position in a gravitational field, like planet Earth, there's a gravitational field. If you place objects higher up, they're going to now have energy stored inside of them that can potentially result in movement or kinetic energy of some sort. And so when this ball is high up in the air, it has a lot of potential energy stored in it now just because of its location right where it is right here. Or at the top of this hill, there's a lot of potential energy, again, because of your location in this gravitational field on planet Earth. But there are some more abstract forms of potential energy. One that's going to come up a lot this unit is chemical energy. So chemical energy is the energy stored in molecular compounds and in chemicals and substances. And so in a substance or in a chemical, there's all these bonds holding atoms together. And that arrangement of atoms held together by bonds, that's actually, there's potential energy in here. There's energy stored in the structure of this molecule, and we call that chemical energy. And so the energy found in chemical substances, because of the way they're bonded together, and these bonds that are holding these atoms together, there's energy in that arrangement of those substances. So all chemicals have some sort of chemical energy stored inside of them, and that's potential energy as well. So that's the difference between potential and kinetic energy. And then the last thing that these notes end with is a quick intro to thermodynamics. And so thermodynamics is just the study of energy and how it can transfer from one place to another place, or transform from one type of energy to a different type of energy. And so as we're studying and tracking that energy, that's called thermodynamics. And so this picture is a pretty straightforward, easy example of thermodynamics in action. We have like someone who's climbing this ladder out of the water up to this diving board. And so that's kinetic energy, right? As you're climbing up the ladder, going up to the diving board, lots of kinetic energy being used. But that kinetic energy is now actually becoming potential energy as you go higher and higher. And so now there's potential energy stored in this diver as they stand on top of this diving platform. And that potential energy can then be transformed into kinetic energy again as that person then steps off or jumps off, and then the gravitational field then pulls them back down. And now there's kinetic energy. And so we have this transformation of kinetic energy into potential energy, and potential energy into kinetic energy. And so that's just a nice intro example of thermodynamics. That's what we're looking at here. And so we're going to talk a lot about this in Unit 3, and this whole idea of how energy is in living things is transferred and transformed over and over and over again into lots of different ways, or in lots of different ways. And so there's two laws of thermodynamics that we need to all know for this class. The first, so there's formally the first law of thermodynamics, which is one that you guys have actually learned probably since early science classes. Even in elementary school, you kind of start learning this concept, and it gets hit pretty hard in every science class. But the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And so all of the energy that exists will always exist, and it can't just disappear from the universe, and it doesn't just come from nowhere. And so instead, energy can be transferred from one place to another place, or it can be transformed from one type of energy to a different type of energy, but it doesn't just disappear or go away or come from nowhere. It's not created or destroyed. And so this is important to think about anytime we're looking at energy, something involving energy, because that energy had to come from somewhere, and then that energy is going somewhere else. And so a lot of times we think about energy being used, and then it becomes easy to think that when that energy is used, the energy is gone. But that's not true. Energy, when you use energy, it doesn't just disappear. It actually went somewhere else. And so keeping track of that energy is a big focus of thermodynamics. And so lots of biological examples in this picture right here. So you can see that like plants they can grow, and without consuming other living things. They don't eat food, but they can grow and build a lot of chemical energy. A lot of chemical potential energy is stored in the organic molecules that make up these plants. But that energy came from somewhere. That energy came from the sun. They actually are taking kinetic energy from sunlight and transforming it into the potential energy that makes the sugars and the organic molecules that builds the plant. And then this deer is going to then eat that chemical energy, and that chemical energy is now going to be transferred to the deer, who is now going to have that energy that it's going to make use of, and then it's going to, through its metabolism, break down that organic material that it ate in its food and use that for kinetic energy. And it's going to move around and frolic through the woods and run. And that energy that it's using came from the food that it had eaten. And then eventually a cheetah pops out of nowhere and then eats the gazelle here, deer, whatever I called it, gazelle, I guess. And now that chemical energy, whatever chemical energy that deer still had, is now being transferred to the cheetah. So those are some examples of energy always coming from somewhere and going somewhere else. And then another question would be, okay, what happens to that energy after it is being used to like frolic through the meadow? That energy does go somewhere. So I'll talk about that in a second here. So let's talk about the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law, this one's kind of one that students are not super familiar with. The second law of thermodynamics states that energy, whenever energy is being transferred or transformed in some way, it's always going to increase the entropy of the universe, which really means the second law of thermodynamics is stating that the entropy of the universe is always increasing, always over time. There's more and more entropy. Now, entropy is a word that you probably have never heard of for a lot of us. The word entropy is basically a measurement of disorder or chaos. Okay, so entropy is disorganization, disorder, randomness, chaos. That's entropy. And so what the second law of thermodynamics is saying is that the universe over time is becoming more and more disorganized. There's more and more disorder over time in the universe in total. And anytime energy is being used or transformed or transferred or whatever, it's always going to result in more entropy, more chaos, more disorder than there was 5 seconds ago. And so as I started this video, when I started the video, there was less disorder in the universe than there is now. And I actually have been contributing to adding to the disorder of the universe as I've been talking, which is hopefully a concept you'll kind of start understanding after this video. And so first know the word entropy. So memorize the word entropy, that is talking about disorder, unorganization, randomness, chaos. Okay, that's the word entropy. And so in biology, there's lots of good examples of this. Anytime a living organism is using chemical energy in the food that it obtained to then, when it's using that energy to power its body or to power its muscles or to make its heart beat or to pump the blood or to think or to breathe or to run in the river, whenever you're using that energy from that chemical energy that was stored in your food, and you're now using it you're transforming it into kinetic energy, well, that is going to result in a large increase in entropy in the universe. And what's happening during that process is you're taking that nice organized food, that fish, that Chipotle burrito, that McDonald's hamburger, you're taking that nice organized piece of material and of chemical substances, and in your body, it's being broken down through catabolic reactions into smaller, simpler molecules that you're spewing out back into the universe, into your surrounding. So like this bear, for example, is eating this fish, which is this super organized collection of matter in the universe. This fish, which was a very organized life form on this planet. And then when it's being eaten by the bear, ultimately through the bear's metabolism, that fish will become CO2 and water molecules that are released from the bear through the process of cell respiration, which we'll talk about a lot soon. But that's what's coming. That's the result of all this happening. And this bear getting the energy from that fish, it's going to result in that fish being broken down into these smaller, simpler molecules. And in the process of that happening, it also produces heat. So heat is one of the main things that always gets produced during these chemical transformations and these energy transformations that are taking place. There's always heat that gets produced a lot of the times. And all of that's being shot out back to the surrounding in the universe. So there was a bear and he ate the fish, and now there's chaos. That nice organized fish is no longer nice and organized. It's all these small molecules now flying around everywhere in the universe now. And then heat is being produced, and heat is literally molecules now moving faster. And so when you're radiating heat, you're causing the molecules around you to now start moving faster, because that's what heat is. And so all because this bear decided to eat this fish and then use that fish to now be a bear and do bear things. It's resulting in chaos and entropy, an increase in entropy to do this. And so that's the second law of thermodynamics in a biological sense. And so this gives you, well, this picture just kind of illustrates the idea of low entropy versus high entropy. Things that have low entropy are very organized things. So whenever you have like a concentration gradient where there's these molecules very concentrated in one area and not so concentrated in another area, like that's organization. That's low entropy. It's not disorganized, it's organized. Or like these bricks nicely stacked on top of each other, we would say that that's low entropy, that's very organized. Even like a living thing, you guys are very, 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 very organized collections of matter. You're made up of all these atoms that have joined together to form these complex molecules like proteins and DNA and lipids and carbohydrates that build cells, which are super organized, and build body tissue like your muscle tissue and your skin tissue and your blood. And you have all these organ systems working together. You are very organized. You are very low entropy, okay? But then things that are high entropy are things like molecules now just flying around everywhere along their concentration gradient. Large molecules now becoming these smaller, less organized molecules. Or this stack of bricks now, sooner or later, being this random mess of bricks. That's high entropy. And so remember, though, that according to the second law of thermodynamics, the universe will always be increasing in entropy. So the universe will always have a tendency to go from things like this always to things like this, more entropy. That's what the universe wants. So really, anything that leads to more entropy, like that's what the universe wants. The universe is rooting for those type of things to happen, which is why when like castles were built thousands of years ago, they don't stay nice and organized. Like sooner or later, the universe has its way and it starts to crumble. Or you set up a concentration gradient. Sooner or later, those molecules will diffuse back down their concentration gradients back into disorder. Or living things, when you die, you will decay back into random small molecules. Like the universe will win. The universe will always find a way to increase entropy. That's the big idea here. And so the last thing on these in topic 1, and one of the most important things, is this slide here, which is talking about how is it then in a universe that always wants more disorder, how did we ever end up with a planet that has life forms on it? So life, like I said, you guys are life cells, living things. We are literally the most organized thing in the universe. Like, it's crazy to think about. You guys are like the lowest entropy thing in the known universe. Like, we are so organized collections of matter. Like, we are not just random atoms. Our atoms are very, very organized, and us and in all cells and all living things on this planet. So the question becomes, how is that possible in a universe that's always increasing in disorder, increasing in entropy? How can life exist? Okay, like how does that even happen? And the answer is kind of simple, but kind of complex. The answer is that as a result of you staying nice and organized, it requires a lot of energy to do that. And so to stay nice and low entropy in a universe who hates you because you're low entropy, and like the universe looks at your body and is in disgust. It doesn't like low entropy, but you are very low entropy. Now to maintain that, to maintain such a very organized collection of matter in our chaotic universe, it requires a huge input of energy all the time, every moment of every day. Living things, cells, always have to have a source of energy to maintain this organization, which is why when you die, or when you stop eating, or when you stop obtaining energy, you will die and your body will become less organized. It will start decaying. That's the end of the story for all of us. Sooner or later, we will decay back into high entropy. But until then, we are working very hard with an input of energy to maintain this low entropy. And as a result of doing that, from all this energy that we're constantly using to have such low entropy, it actually is creating way more entropy than we're removing from the universe. So we're creating overall more disorder every day than the disorder that we are taking away from the universe. So the universe is actually, I hope that makes sense. Basically, you're making a mess in the universe. And yes, your body is very organized, but overall the mess you're making is way messier than how unmessy you are. And so in order to maintain my nice organized body, every day I'm eating Chipotle burritos and McDonald's hamburgers and fish from the river, and I'm taking these nice organized collections of matter, and I am obtaining energy from it to maintain my low entropy state. But by doing that, like I explained earlier, you're spewing out small molecules. I'm breathing out CO2 that used to be food and water vapor, and I'm releasing heat. I'm radiating heat from my body, which is now taking these nice organized large molecules and turning them back into small chaotic molecules that are moving at high speeds because I'm also releasing heat. And so really you're basically like an entropy creating machine. And so overall, the universe actually is okay with you existing, because you are creating way more entropy than you're removing from the universe, is, I guess, the short answer to what's happening. And so I hope that kind of makes sense. But that's a big concept you guys need to know, that all this entropy that you're decreasing in the universe via your body, in the formation of your body, in this nice organized collection of matter in your cells, it does not outweigh the huge amount of entropy that you're adding to the universe all the time through food consumption, for example, or through obtaining organic matter and then using that chemical energy to remain nice and organized. And as a result of that, you're constantly, on a day-to-day basis, every moment, even right now inside your body, you are breaking down food that you had eaten in nice organized collections of matter, and you're spewing back out chaos, these small molecules that are moving around chaotically in the surrounding now, and you're radiating heat, all of which is adding entropy. So we can talk more about that in class, but that's it for this topic. Thank you, guys.